We are live.
Are we? Yeah, your chair. I'll just fill it out later.
You guys are live.
Great.
Hello.
Okay. Reply, Karen.
Okay, call this House to order, and on the motion that this House will impose an international moratorium on doctors immigrating from third countries, I call upon the Prime Minister to start the case. Now, the first everyone, don't move in and out of the room, and place your phones on silent. Thank you very much.
Here.
Unfortunately, we live in a system where doctors can be enticed by money, that they can forget the very fact that they have a duty to save lives first, but instead go where the money then entices them. This is a world of need and not greed. What is the burden that comes from the side of government? We're going to show you one thing, that doctors have a duty to serve the community that is most in need above others themselves, especially when it comes to a time when the people closest in proximity to you are exactly the people who live within your own country in itself. It also just happens to be a case where there's a class of countries that are very much underdeveloped and lack human resource for their healthcare in itself. Countries such as Angola, Sierra Leone, and also a lot of nations within Africa in itself. What is the stance that comes from the side of government? We believe that the global community should then put a ban on these doctors who wish to emigrate from these third world countries, especially when you come from a very much underdeveloped country. We think that the notion is not for you to move to these first world countries in itself. How will the proposal look like from the side of government? If a man was probably from Angola and Kenya, and you are a doctor in itself, he needs to serve his own country of Kenya first. And you can't move to a different country where possibly and most probably the pay is higher. Or you can't even move to that country because you do not wish to live within your own certain country, probably due to the difficulties that you may then have there. The difficulties that your own people even face are far worse off when you do not have medical capacity that you then give towards them. Secondly, we think that the UN should also put a temporary resolution on first world countries trying to hire these doctors in itself. This ban will only be lifted if you then fulfill these three conditions in itself. A, that when you have a reasonable healthcare system or industry that can sustain its own people. But B, when you have a sufficient number of workers in that industry. And C, that the number of people who stay in that country as doctors are not outnumbering the number of people who emigrate away from the country in itself. Until these criteria are then met, we think that first world countries cannot hire these doctors that come from a country in itself. Before I move on to my first argument, sure.
Sir, do you recognize that in a lot of third world countries, say Philippines or India, there are too many doctors there that the ability of doctors are not utilized at its very best?
No, there are not many doctors within Philippines and even these countries in the south. We're talking about other countries that also need it. Countries such as Kenya, which are hugely underdeveloped, more than the premise of Philippines in itself. These countries do not have the capacity to have doctors. That's why they ask for international aid from a lot of organizations, especially when the Ebola outbreak occurred within Sierra Leone in itself. That's a good example, not yours. Sit down. First argument, what is the duty of a doctor within today's day? A, we think that the purpose of a person being a doctor is to save lives above everything else and to provide to those in need in itself. To obtain this profit and to get and garner money is a secondary benefit towards being a doctor in itself. Don't trust what your parents tell you. That's why volunteering as a doctor is hugely encouraged by a lot of organizations in itself, like the RCRC, like Mercy, or Peace Corps, or even Doctors Without Borders. Hell, even on the ground floor, you see a banner that says, IMU invites you to go to a certain and volunteer within certain countries in itself. It's very much encouraged by the medical fraternity for you to go out there and then give this kind of volunteering aid to these people who are very much in need of that medical capacity. In fact, Mr. Speaker, even within World War or even within war situations, as a medical doctor within a field in itself, you have an obligation to help even that person who comes from a different faction in itself. That understands the duty and your limit of boundary is then overreached by you saving a person's life first, regardless of who that person then is. But B, in a third world country, especially when it comes to certain impoverished nations within Africa in itself, these are countries that have to survive massive brain drain, and they struggle from doing that in itself. But why? Because they put a huge amount of their money and their capacity to allow the brightest minds within a certain country in itself to study overseas within Germany or India in itself. Despite having a lot of numbers of years within a contract and having served those certain years, it's still not enough for them to serve their own country in itself. Especially when that service means to be a scarcity within its own people in itself. It shouldn't be just an investment for your people to serve you for about 10 years. But as long as you're a nation and a person who is a citizen of that country in itself, you have to understand the duty that the people have then imposed towards you and your duty to take care of the people in your country in itself. No, thank you. Other than that, Mr. Speaker, we think that when it comes to certain experiences that doctors have within these countries, they are a very much precious resource without the need or without the existence of certain medical facilities in itself. What do I mean? This situation is exacerbated within certain countries that face a lot of problems of medical facilities in itself. And that's why you exactly have doctors to aid within certain situations in itself. First point of this, when you do not have the necessary facilities, it's very important for you to have professionals on the ground who do not just have experience, also the ability and capability to carry out their own profession in itself. To determine that sickness without the facility being there, to determine the magnitude of the endemic happening within Sierra Leone when it comes to the Ebola outbreak, and to prescribe the certain medications in order to sustain that certain disease from spreading up to other people in itself. But secondly, also due to the lack of facilities in itself, what happens is that this disease then spreads faster without the need of that without the existence of those doctors being there on the ground to aid these people. What is the problem of that? Because it is easier for a certain country to get aid from your own doctors in itself than it is for you to get aid from other countries in itself, because things such as UN help is very much political in a sense where it becomes very much different and very much difficult for you to ask for help as it takes a lot of time. Considering these situations, Mr. Speaker, that means that more people will have a higher mortality rate the longer you prolong that problem when you no longer have people working in your country. But when you ignore the circumstance that people have to then suffer this problem, Mr. Speaker, what happens is that you are then subjected to subpar education and subpar treatment that other doctors may then give towards you, or even the lack of resource within a certain country to help those people. That's equivalent to leaving your own patients to die as a doctor. That's equivalent to not even giving treatment to these people when you're exactly the kind of state that can provide that duty towards your own people in itself. Why is that very much problematic? Because it's almost criminal for first world countries to entice you a lot of money and say, come to our country and ignore your country in itself. That shows a lot of excess happens within these countries in itself. The very fact that the medicinal field is a private industry within America in itself or Germany shows that there's more of an access rather than a need for people to become doctors in that country in the first place. The conclusion to that is that we think that you should serve your community first, and whether or not third world nations are the ones who need these people the most. In order to compete with another country that obviously has a bigger advantage than you, you are not able to do that. We fight for people who need this help. We fight for doctors. We fight for doctors also in need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister, call upon the leader of opposition to give us the case.
It is a lie to say that no doctors are incentivized by money, because how many actually totally altruistic individuals you can ever get? It's also a massive lie to say that there are no doctors who want to go to third world countries to help. We have seen massive promotions by not only A, private medical companies, and B, state enforced medical groups as well, to actually send individuals to another countries, let them live there, and actually help individuals there. In my speech, I'm going to tell you firstly why it's legitimate to have give doctors the ability to opt out, and secondly, on 5 levels, why it further harm third world nation. Before that, some rebuttals that didn't fit in and a clear delineation. We need to delineate the minute characterization they give you, because the only characterization they give you about third world countries is not enough doctors. Not entirely true, but I'm also going to show you, I'm going to be the fairer team here and show you the 2 scenarios. Firstly, assuming that the countries have not enough workers, like the characterization they give you, we will still let them opt out. Why is this so? Because we tell you that there are FDIs who invest in African countries. So like say, for example, there are Chinese corporations who invest in Kenya. Therefore, Chinese corporations will build up infrastructure, will build up like hospitals over there. They will set up the hospitals and bring their expertise from their home countries to there. Therefore, we are going to further justify in our argument why it's unfair to say that you can't opt out because that help is still there. But secondly, they also need to accept that there are third world countries where there are enough doctors, like what we gave you an example of Philippines, where there are too many doctors because let's recognize, right? A lot of individuals in Philippines are told ever since they are young that in order to like raise the standards of their life, they need to become doctors. Because becoming a doctor means you earn way more money than being a street sweeper. We're going to show you why it's more harmful. So firstly, when I told you about this is a duty of a doctor, we do recognize that. But how on earth are you going to find that many truly altruistic individuals? We think that individuals in poorer third world countries and poorer countries as a whole are still incentivized by money as a whole. That's why you see like an influx of individuals wanting to become doctor. That's why like when foreign medical schools go to third world countries, you see a lot of individuals like signing up to become doctors because individuals are still driven by money as a whole. So that idea is still very neutral. But next, they told you doctors are a precious resource. That argument can only fly if they can prove that there are sufficient infrastructure to facilitate the activities of doctors to help individuals in those countries. It is problematic because we tell you that foreign direct investments do go in there and send in their own doctors. So to a certain extent, you do see like some Chinese corporations who may not hire individuals from that country, but take in Chinese doctors from their countries over there. So we think that if the doctors are like left there, not having any job or not having any infrastructure, it's therefore abhorrent to not let the doctor migrate to another country and utilize his skill set. Next, they told you that aid on the ground is much better if people are engaged there. We don't think it's very effective because let's recognize, right, like during the Ebola outbreak as a whole, doctors on the ground don't even know what on earth was going on. They did not know how to deal with the problem in the best way possible. Therefore, we think that if you actually allow individuals to if you actually allow individuals to go to other countries, we think that sure, they may have migrated off, but their sympathy for their previous countries was still there. Therefore, you can obviously they will go back to their country and aid. But if under their paradigm, individuals still do not have a job or facilities, those individuals will be dumbfounded by the decision and can't make the decision as effective as individuals who are clearly practicing in other countries and flying to their home countries to help. So that's more harmful. Okay, on my first argument, the abilities of doctors to opt out. We think doctors opted into the Hippocratic Oath, but they did not opt into a suboptimal lifestyle. Because you must recognize, like what I told you, in third world countries, some of the third world countries have too many doctors. Doctors graduate, but they end up working on the streets, end up working as maids. Why did this happen? Because the mentality that you must earn more money. We think that doctors do not opt into the life of suffering. Some doctors want to practice their profession, but they can't in your paradigm because it may not provide the infrastructure sufficient for them to actually utilize it. Next, we also think that states can't dictate the value of an individual. Because let's recognize it. They want patriotism from those individuals. I don't think you can actually dictate that. That's A. But B, assuming that the person is patriotic, I think that person would also want to utilize his skill in the best way possible that could, in the long run, have a quid pro quo that actually help this country. The analogy I give you in my rebuttal. That's why states allow you to smoke, allows you to go bungee jumping, and allows you to spend money in the way you want. Because states don't dictate that. Some individuals may be as patriotic as possible, but they never choose for a suboptimal lifestyle. They may want to help their countries in any way. For example, like migrating to another countries and helping research in the other countries and bringing that research to their own countries when it's in need. We think that doctors have the ability to opt out. Before I move on, go.
So he's saying that because they don't have facilities, that's why they should move out. Then considering that, who exactly is going to help the people on the ground by that when you don't have all the infrastructure you're talking about?
Yes, okay. First situation is if there's no infrastructures, I think that not every single individual will move out. There are some amount of individuals that will move out, but we think that the utility argument I gave you that is more effective if they have been practicing rather than sitting there and sweeping the streets. But next, the FDI argument that's coming now. Why further harms third world nation? Firstly, it lacks the utilization of doctors. They are not being able to utilize their full ability as a whole. Some may migrate to other countries to continuously utilize their skill, but they may also want to help their home nation when it's in trouble. That doesn't happen on their side. Next, suboptimal treatment. If there are doctors that don't want to be in their countries in the first place, it means that they provide a subpar treatment because you need enthusiasm to treat a particular kind of complicated diseases. These kind of doctors may think that he's living a suboptimal lifestyle, therefore he wants to migrate out. But if the mentality is still there, he won't treat the person in the best way possible because he thinks that something is cringing upon his ability to move. Next, it disincentivizes people to be doctors because individuals will feel that if I become a doctor and I can't find a job, I can't opt out. Therefore, individuals would rather not be doctors, which is even more harmful under your side because you claim you need more doctors. Four, it lacks incentives from FDI. You must know the argument I gave you. Chinese corporations invest there. If you get the flexibility over there to move in and out, corporations would work there. But if Chinese doctors realize that if I become a citizen of that country, but if I want to opt out in the near future, I can't. Therefore, it's less likely for them to join. But next, the influx of disease, it's harder to utilize because time sensitivity and the ability of time to mobilize. But if they migrated to other countries and they actually sympathize when the home country is a problem, they can straight away go to their country and utilize and help them. For all those reasons, we are very proud to oppose.
Yes, yeah. The opposition are called to give us a speech. Get there.
Mr. Chair, let me translate the words of side opposition to a simple manner. That is that people are greedy, hence we should facilitate their greed. They should move to first world countries because they have higher wages, and that's the only way somehow you can climb up the social ladder. Let's look at several rebuttals before I enter my arguments. The first thing they wanted to counter is that you don't have facilities in countries that are impoverished, hence you should move out in order for you to utilize the skills. But the argument coming from Bucharest is that the reason why we need these doctors on the ground is because we don't have the facilities. For example, if you don't have the best form or the best medicinal instruments in order to determine whether a certain fever is really Ebola or something even bigger than that, that means you need doctors who are experts to stay within the country because you don't have all of the modern equipments that first world countries already have. Considering that means you need the best doctors to stay there in order for you to get the best minds to figure out what's the situation. There is also countering the rhetoric on how you control the epidemics within these areas. So that means while you're living here are people who are dependent on foreign aid and foreign doctors to come into these countries. The second part to this is that what they say here is that countries like Zimbabwe or Angola, at the end of the day, needs to depend on foreign doctors who are altruistic or coming to the countries. This thing, firstly, is political. So if a country were to have something that is against values of a Western liberal democracy, then they can be sanctioned within the long run, hence condemning people on the ground. It is also harmful when countries who have a limited number of budget is willing to slush out funds for healthcare because they think they are already dependent on other people funneling in money. That means they are less likely to build hospitals on the ground. What happens here is that they would use this money, like for example, Zimbabwe, they use the Chinese money from the Chinese government to build rails rather than hospitals instead, because they see that there is a utility directly towards the people. But when it comes to healthcare, another group of people are able to take in the void rather than actually doing so. So the third part is this: is that the third part of the problem is that you already have access in certain countries like India or the Philippines. Now we think that this access can be used to its best because the lack of facilities in your countries would also mean you need more doctors for you to be hired on. And your problem at the end of the day is not the problem of doctors not able to get jobs. It's the problem of doctors who prioritize the idea of profit or get higher wages in comparison to the ability to work or serve on the ground. And that is the idea that we want to change. And this policy creates the change of mentality on what the profession of a doctor is. That is why Boukris's first argument is explaining to you the duty of the doctor. In fact, they decided not to clash on the argument of negligence, because practically what they're doing here is that you are putting profit ahead of you, hence you are neglecting the situation of doctors on the ground. None of that has been rebutted. Let's look what I'm going to argue in today's debate. I'm going to argue on two things. Firstly, how this creates an over-dependency and foreign aid. And second of all, which one best allows the private industry to invest in this country, since this is what I'm talking about. But before that, Abel.
Sir, how then is it inherently negligent when these doctors are still practicing when they do choose to opt out for the donations? These doctors are not foregoing their duties as doctors, you know. Like that's why
it's negligent because firstly, is that you are talking about doctors going to a first world countries who already probably has universal healthcare system and already have doctors who can treat them there. It's also negligent on the second part because you are not actually occupying a role that you can do within your own country, hence you are more likely to face epidemics and crises and allows these diseases to spread out even more. First argument, how this creates over-dependency on foreign aid. When you allow doctors to leave, that means you force the West to balance out the number of doctors within third world countries. That is why, like Boukris said earlier on, it's popular for groups like ICRC to put doctors or Doctors Without Borders to move to these countries because the lack of doctors or the lack of facilities in these countries. So at the same time, these organizations are the ones who are also invest in infrastructures in third world countries. And these countries are at the mercy of foreign aid and groups of doctors to cure the sick. Why is this harmful? Because firstly, foreign doctors then are perceived to be contributing more to the country than doctors within the country itself. So under that paradigm, that is when countries are becoming actually more apathetic to investing into scholarships for young students to become doctors instead, because they already assume there is somebody else who's going to take their jobs within these countries. So they are also less likely to fund their own healthcare, and they slash it out from the national budget. That's why it becomes a black hole for other first world nations who want to give aid, or for example, for foreign development aid, because they are not going to actually improve the infrastructure first, but they're going to improve on other parts. That's why it's so controversial, the idea of giving aid, even giving global aid nowadays, because they know the funding wouldn't go exactly onto what their objective is on the ground. So when China or the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank gives funding or gives out loans to Zimbabwe, they are more likely to build trains and railroads rather than hospitals, because they know somebody else are able to fill up this problem. Why is this problematic? It comes into two parts. Because firstly, it is contingent on the idea whether that foreign aid, whether the country is able to give more aid, or it's also contingent on organizations having the ability to give out loans to these countries in the first place. So when they lose out, for example, if the IMF is no longer able to give you loans, or AIIB is no longer to actually give you this kind of money, that means all the facilities that exist, there are no facilities that exist in these countries, hence they have to build from ground zero and start from the beginning all over again. At the end of the day, most people lose out because now the countries have to invest a huge chunk of money because most of these people also pull out from these regions. Second of all, I said earlier on, how it becomes extremely political also, because when suddenly your country have values that are against Western liberal democracies, let's say, for example, Uganda has been passed and killed against gay bills, that means all the foreign aid that's been given to you has to also be cut off. The problem here is that people on the ground don't face or don't meet these doctors and don't get the funding for such facilities or healthcare anymore because it's been taken out for you. So now, not only you don't have facilities that are of yourself or doctors that are available there, but you also don't have doctors from these foreign organizations. But here's the second argument I'm going to make, is that how exactly you're going to get the private industry to invest in third world countries? Because the private industry also wants the best doctors at the same time. The only way for them to get these doctors are to follow the criteria we said earlier on. If they were to invest in creating more facilities or having more doctors on the ground in countries like Angola or countries that lack doctors in the first place, that means they're able to develop the industry and fulfill the criteria. So more private actors would move into these countries and invest there. And only then they can actually somehow transfer the doctors from these countries into first world countries and able to hire them. With that, we are able to balance the number of doctors is missing in these countries. but side opposition is going to ignore us just like how they ignore our arguments.
Thank you very much. That is freedom of comment. Now call upon the leader of opposition.
Yes, sure.
What are you saying?
We don't think it's a bad thing to be driven by profit. We think it's the natural incentive of every person to want to be able to raise their own standards of living and to be able to decide the way in which they want to live their own life on their own terms. We think everyone is naturally incentivized to elevate the quality of their life and to accumulate wealth. We think this is an aspect of personal choice that they completely disregard, and we think they make the healthcare of these third world developing nations even worse under their side, because they create a disincentive for people. They create a disincentive for doctors to go to these areas in the first place, or even more so, they create a disincentive for people who already live within those third world areas to choose to become doctors at the end of the day. I'm going to talk about within my speech. I'm going to bring back all the things Kenneth talked about, but firstly, let's look at this idea of when does public interest supersede personal choice. Because the logic and the premise that they wanted to come up here was that the situation on the ground is so dire. It's a situation that's so bad and people are dying and the infrastructure is really, really bad. But we don't think so, right? We think, like, even Kenneth gave a brilliant example of how in the Philippines there's an over concentration of doctors there, because the underlying narrative is that to improve the quality of life, you should opt into becoming a doctor because it means you make the most money. You make the most money. But even then, we engaged and we gave you another example, right, of how when in countries where there is a depletion of doctors or there is a lack of doctors, there are foreign agents that come in, people like this Chinese diaspora that comes to South Africa that then chooses to cater to the market there because they have a natural incentive to go there, because they have a natural incentive to go there because there are lots of diseases they can cure and they can make money there, right? So we don't think that's as much of a problem. But even then, right, even within Mukriz's speech, when he talked about things like NGOs, like the ICRC and things like that, we think that's a much better form of individuals coming to those areas and choosing to give that type of healthcare because they are willing to do so and they want to do so, and they're not doing so because they're being forced to do so. And that's where you get the best type of healthcare available, right? Because when you don't force people to dispense that type of healthcare and to be able to treat people, that's when people do it, and people are doing it because they want to. That's when you disallow an avenue for these people to be inefficient.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay. So we think, right? Yeah, so considering that, we don't think that there's a problem. We don't think there's a problem, right? We don't think there's a problem there. We think the trade-off they then want to make, right, is they're willing to keep doctors there even if they don't want to be there. But we think keeping them there, like, this is a problem that happens on both sides. Doctors from those third world areas, keeping them there doesn't ensure that they will want to do so, right? And that happens on our side as well. But on our side, right, the harm is minimized because you allow an opt-out ability for people to be able to go out to other areas. So, no, thank you. Okay, so on both sides, that harm exists where those doctors might not want to be able to migrate outside of that country. But on our side, at least we allow that opt-out clause for people who do want to migrate to be able to do so,
yes, yeah.
right? So, we think in this instance, people who don't want to die will still be able, people won't die because they still will be able to receive treatment, and therefore it shouldn't come at the expense of these individuals' personal choice to be able to shape their life in the way in which they want to. We think what happens then is that perverse harm where you create that disincentive for people to become doctors. I'll take one point.
Now, considering the fact that somehow people become disincentivized to become doctors because they no longer see the profit, wouldn't that also solve your problem of access of doctors? But also under our criteria earlier on, wouldn't the countries with access of doctors not fall under our moratorium?
I will answer that within my speech. Okay, so let's look at the things that Kenneth talked about within his speech, right? Firstly, we think we need to talk about this idea of personal choice and how we disallow individuals from being able to shape disallow individuals to be able to shape the quality of life in which they want to do so. We think if you are a doctor and you choose to provide that public service to people, you do it out of the good of your own heart, and also because you want to achieve the standard of you want to shape the standards of your own life, right? States never dictate. The state should never dictate the ability of you to be able to do so. That's why we allow individuals to be able to do things like smoke and drink, because we allow you to be able to dictate, we allow you to be able to decide the quality of life that you want to have on your own terms. We think what happens then is when the state clamps down upon you and says that because you've chosen to give this public service, that you will now be trapped with giving that, you will now be trapped within this arena of continuously giving this public service, is one that's extremely bad, right? Because when because what happens then is that you create a disincentive. From doctors from third world nations to ever want to move to that area, right? So if there are doctors from first world nations to ever want to move to those areas, because if these are doctors who naturally sympathize with the horrible situations and the horrible breakout epidemics and things like this, and they want to move there, there's a disincentive for them to ever go there, because now they understand even if they go there, they will not be able to come out, right? Because and that will be a natural disincentive for them to ever want to go there in the first place, because of things like unanticipated life experiences in the future. They might not be able to then move, right? So we think that's a bad thing. When you hinder their choice, you disincentivize them from ever doing so. But then we also think when you force individuals to be able to stay within that area, you force individuals to be able to dispense, even if you are able to create better infrastructure, because there are more doctors within that third world nation, there's more incentive for them to be able to create more infrastructure. Even if you have the best infrastructure in the world, and you have doctors there that are not willing to be able to dispense that in the most efficient manner, you have things like doctors being very dismissive of symptoms. You have very dismissive of symptoms, because they're only there within that clinic to be able to get through the day and to be able to prescribe medication and then leave. They don't they're not as careful as they would be. They're not as thorough as they would be, right? So there's an inefficiency, there's a form of brain drain there that's very bad. But lastly, right, on this idea of foreign aid and foreign investment, we think even if there is a complete, we think what happens then is that foreign direct investment of other companies to go into these third world nations is one that is significantly hampered. Because what happens is if these companies want to then send their doctors and send their pharmacists or their medical agents to those countries, these people will naturally opt out and they won't want to go there. And if they don't have people to be able to send to these countries, that means these companies won't then have an incentive to set up areas within places within those areas, and to then to be able to develop that area further. So we think the harms are a lot worse under their side. For all of these reasons, give this debate to side opposition.
So very much, and I call upon the speaker from the government side.
Mr. Speaker, it is very regrettable that in times of humanitarian crisis that these people still want to disregard the kind of humanitarian needs that the people on the ground need, and in fact they want to prioritize the personal interest of the doctors instead of caring about the public welfare in the first place. So we think that there's a lot of problems that exist within their case which we want them to fix, and which we will point out the flaws and why, and also the lack of engagement towards our case in the first place, right? And firstly, in terms of the lack of engagement within our case, right? Because they kept on harping on the fact that in places like Philippines, for example, where over-concentration of doctors still happen, right? But this just shows how they have disregarded the parameter and criteria to be met that we have set up in our mechanism in the first place. How there are still 3 things that you need to fulfill before you get to go on with that, right? Firstly, this country must already have a sustainable healthcare system and industry, and secondly, they must have sufficient number of workers, and thirdly, the number of people staying in the countries as a doctor is greater than the number of doctors living in the countries. So it means that if these three criteria have been met, these doctors can emigrate to other countries as well in order for them to get better jobs with better payment, right? For example, so that's why we say that they have not really listened to the case that we have presented in the first place. And secondly, they also didn't actually engage with the plight of people on the ground, like how we have seen in people in third world country where they lack doctors and medication, right? How these people don't actually even have access to basic needs like medication, education, and that's why we want all these experts and specialists to stay within the country so that these people can help their own people, because they must understand better their own people, right? Because their culture, because that's where their people are. So the love and affection is there, and that's how we think that they can treat better, and the relatability between these doctors and also their own people will become much better, and these people will have more trust, and because of that they might be able to recover even better as individuals, right? Because they have experienced all this. But before that, yes, sir.
Are you okay with banning the few amounts of private for-profit hospitals in those countries if you completely don't want profit-minded in the medical field?
Sir, like it will still be up to the nation on how they want, or the public corporations, how they want to operate the system, right? But the basic thing is that we want all these doctors to still maintain or be within these third world countries, because we think that it will improve the situation in the first place. I have several issues several caching issues that I'll talk to you about, right? So let's move on to the first issue. That is, will all these proposals that they say in terms of the FDI basic investment from other countries into third world countries will ever be enough, right? Firstly, I will prove to you why these kind of measures won't be enough for these people in the first place. Because in terms of political, right, how these people, these other nations will always have that incentive in order for them to actually try to invest in United Nations, right? For example, in Uganda, where the AIDS, the level of AIDS is higher, and they're trying to ask money from IMF, but IMF didn't give money to them until they revoked the gay ban that they imposed on their own people. So we say that there are other subliminal interests for these other countries in order for them to first invest in terms of facilities and other measures in this country in the first place. So we say the limitation and restrictions that exist within the status quo will hinder the mobility and advancement of these nations in the first place, right? So we have said also, in terms of China FDI, how they're very optimistic in their case and saying that all this expertise and facilities can be gained through via the foreign direct investment from China, and it will like improve their situation immediately, right? But we say that it is very complicated in the first place when you are trying to paint the nature that people will just come in and help you, because we may have the need, we may have received aid in terms of volunteers, doctors, but still that won't be enough for these people, because they will always face the lack of doctors and expertise within the nation, right? So if you still let these doctors to come out, like the level of doctors and expertise that we need within the country won't be enough for these people in the first place. And even with these facilities, will they be able to ensure that these doctors to stay? That's why we need this international moratorium on these doctors in order for them to stay there until the situation has been fixed, right? Secondly, what is the best way to utilize the skills and knowledge of the doctors that we have, right? Because what they talk about, how this doctor should be able to opt out so that he get to go to the other countries and learn about the technologies and advancement and other knowledge they have, right? And bring back to their own knowledge. But the problem here is that when you try to be optimistic on these doctors having like experienced all this comforts in first world nations, how do you think they will be interested to try to import back? Maybe like the knowledge, they lack the incentives to actually try to import back, because they are like already used to the kind of comforts that they have experienced in the first world country, right? Because in the first place, for their job, it is their service to actually be selfless in terms of rendering their service, right? So these doctors should not be selfish in terms of how they want to try do their duty, and that's why we think that in order for you to utilize the skills and knowledge that these doctors have, we should make these doctors stay, and then actually utilize the kind of skills and knowledge that they have, right? And on the third issue, what if the doctors lose interest due to the limitation, right? Because they talk to you about the limitation that might exist because now you're making the doctors stay and they will lose interest, and because of that you will find other jobs as well. But firstly, we see that there's already a natural incentive for the doctors to still keep to their job. Because of what? Because comparatively, the job as a doctor pays like a higher wage compared to other salaries as well. So when you already have the qualifications, why would you resort to jobs like taxi drivers when it has like a comparatively lower wage compared to doctor? Because in this country, especially in countries in need, like the professionals wage, the professionals minimum wage is still like higher compared to the other wage. So that's why we say that there is still a natural incentive, and these doctors will not lose interest in terms of trying to give their duty as a doctor to these people, right? So we say that this kind of limitation doesn't exist in the first place. And even if they might have like less interest in order to treat their people, we say that the constant exposure to the plight of their people will make these people understand better and try to render their best, right? Because this will take some time for them to develop the kind of affection and the kind of understanding and responsibility for these people to materialize the type of service that they will give to these people. And that's why I believe that in terms of imposing international moratorium, it will help this globally and that the doctors actually have a duty to serve their community, the communities most in need above others. And with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Speaker. I'll call up the leadership from the opposition side to give us the comment.
Some government needed to justify a couple of things. But most importantly, they needed to tell us why that thing was essentially the only alternative in order to keep doctors within the ground. Like there was never any discussion as to why then certain alternatives don't exist, right? Because we've already told you across the board there was tension within their own characterization, whereby they told you that doctors are inherently more profit incentivized. If that was the problem, then a side opposition is perfectly willing to pay doctors more within these instances. Like a lot of the things that they try to tell the House don't necessarily work. And this debate then essentially boiled down to two things. Number one, do the rights of an individual to choose to live the way to live their life override the supposed need of the people that they supposedly opted into to caring for? And secondly, which side then best serves the people as a whole? But before this, let us look at their model and show you why their model will because their model was essentially a caveat in terms of allowing people to opt out. But we need to recognize how their model will essentially restrict people from ever opting out as a whole, right? Because their model was three-pronged. Number one, they must have reasonable healthcare on the ground. Number two, they must have sufficient workers. Number three, they must always outnumber the people that emigrate out. Let's closely analyze this, right? The first thing, how you provide reasonable healthcare. But we already told you across the board how our argumentation directly clash with this. In order for you to be able to provide sufficient healthcare or healthcare that is reasonably beneficial, you must then be able to provide proper infrastructures and proper facilities to do so. In order for you to do this, you must be able to have the resources and the funds to get this. But this never occurs on the other side, right? Because there is a lack of an incentive for foreign direct investments in order to fund instances within the grounds. This is because these companies are less likely to want to set up companies or set up hospitals or set up medical companies within these instances, because now they are forced to make their people migrate there, to make the workers migrate there, or now they are forced to make people work within these instances. There's a less of an incentive now because these people are now restricted of the decision in order to opt out from these instances. Hence, there is a less likeliness for foreign direct investments in order to want to fund or set up corporations within these nations. No, thank you. But next, the idea of having sufficient workers and having the idea of having people not migrate, not wanting to emigrate out, be less than the people that are working there. We don't think so. Now under your side, you disincentivize people to ever want to be doctors. Because under your side, right, these people never opted into a contract whereby they were consensual in terms of being unable to opt out. These people wanted to be doctors either because of the high pay or because they actually do want to be doctors in the first place. But your side doesn't recognize that. Your side does not recognize individuals' decisions in order to be able to opt out of a lot of things. So under your side, the idea of having people being like the idea of having more doctors as compared to people emigrating out won't necessarily work, because people are less likely to want to be doctors, and hence that very nature of the instance will never want to function. Also, the very context of a third world nation, whereby the situation on the ground is questionably deplorable. That means the situation on the ground isn't necessarily able to cater to the welfare of its individuals. This means that individuals should be able to get the ability in order to opt out or to choose the life that they wish to wish. If I like the life in America, if I think America pays me more and my quality of life there is better, I should be allowed the inherent right in order to move there. We think that there was never any analysis in terms of why this was a questionable right, and we think that that's quite deplorable. No, thank you. Next, let's look at now the issue of do then the rights of an individual to choose to live their life override the supposed necessity on the ground. Because we need to recognize that individuals do get the rights to choose how they supposedly live their rights, right? That's why the government allows you to spend your money to buy big cars, or the government allows you to move to a certain country because you feel that the situation there is better. We find it quite questionable under their side, whereby you're not extending this policy to a lot of other means, and you're only restricting it to medical care. Within under the very instance of your side is this, that individuals have a duty to care for people on the ground. But we think that these individuals never contracted into caring for individuals, but with the trade-off of having their lives being at a deplorable condition. We think that they never opted into the contract, right? They never signed that contract to begin with. So hence, you now disincentivize people to ever want to be doctors in the first place, because they're not willing to make the trade-off of having me live a bad life as compared to me supposedly caring for people that need to be cared for. We think that the idea of a negligence doesn't exist because recognizing their very own characterization, how then can these doctors on the ground within these instances cater to the needs of the people when your very own characterization considered that the infrastructure on the ground was bad? Isn't this then not a form of negligence under your side, where some doctors who supposedly want to care can't care because of the facilities that you don't provide? We think that under your side is even worse, and negligence is something mutually exclusive, not mutually exclusive. But even if
upon them, right? But then also that you need doctors to be able to like feel that, but you won't have an incentive to have doctors within this area because people from third world countries, because people from elsewhere who want to go into these third world countries are disincentivized from ever opting in to do so. The people who are from those third world countries, like when it comes the time for them to choose what they want to do with their life, are less incentivized to become doctors, right? Because they have restricted mobility, they have a limitation on where they want to go and how far they can achieve, how far they can go within their within their career, right? So because of that restriction, they are naturally disincentivized from being able to do so. So what does this mean, right? And we told you when there's an outbreak, it means things like having less efficient doctors, people who are less able to deal with that because they're very, very dismissive of things like symptoms, because they're only there to work 9 to 5 to get that paycheck to leave, right? But also within your day-to-day doctor work, they're very, very inefficient. And the problem with this, and things that Abel fleshed out within his speech, right, is that you never ever know, like you don't know which doctor is there because they want to be there and which doctor is there because they don't want to be there. The only way you're able to assess the quality of that doctor comes after you receive that damaging treatment, right? Comes after you either after you receive that damaging treatment or after it has harmed you in a certain way. We think in that instance, right, it becomes even more harmful because you're never able to assess who is there because they want to be there and who is there because they're forced to. So we think on all of these levels, right, we were able to show to you why we won this debate. For all of those reasons, Mr. Speaker, because we create a better world with better healthcare, please give this debate to side opposition.
We asked the question, what will you do when there are no facilities and you don't have doctors who are experts to tell what is actually the situation? The answer was that there are check and balances, like waiting for NGOs, waiting for foreign contributions. And that's the answer that they have in order to fix this problem. When we actually explain, like, a myriad of problems, why is this really bad? It's because you create an over-dependency on foreign aid, and also you do not want to invest within your own infrastructure because you think that these doctors can already cater to these problems. The foreign doctors are able to cater to these problems in the first place. Let's look at the criteria that we impose for this temporary moratorium. Is that firstly, you need to have a sustainable healthcare system, you need sufficient number of workers, and the number of doctors who want to serve outnumbers the doctors who want to leave. That means countries with access does not fall into this debate, but the debate is about countries with the lack of doctors instead. The other solution is to pay doctors even more. But this does not concern about third world countries who can't even afford to fork out more money instead. They can't pay most of these wages in order to compete with first world countries. That is why Bucharest earlier on described on how this is practically a new form of colonization, because first world countries are able to rob all these doctors by giving higher wages, by taking them, all of them away into their own countries. So no matter how much these third world countries are able to pay, Bucharest has already experienced first world countries still can pay more, and that's colonization. 3 questions we answered in this debate. Firstly, when the states have the ability to undercut your personal wants? We say when it harms a huge subsection of society. Because when you become an expert in a certain field, and the government has already funded studies, give you scholarships to do so, like how Bucharest explained earlier on, is that you leave a country without any experts. So even if you have an excess of doctors, the specialist that moves because you have higher pay would no longer have somebody to actually be. You become a trainee doctor without somebody to actually teach what is the situation. And then these countries are left with a certain form of resource. That is a form of negligence, because not only you don't have the facilities that we described, you don't have the experts to tell what facilities you need by then. So even if you want to invest, you don't have the experts to dictate what is going on. And that is when the state is able to control over it. That also allows epidemics to actually spread out, because you don't have doctors to tell what you have to do. You don't have doctors to tell what you can contain. And because the smaller number of doctors in these countries who don't have the incentive to stay, that means you are less likely to contain these problems within a certain area, but it's now going to spread out even more because you don't have more hands on the ground. Second question that we answered is that which side will force third world countries to invest in the healthcare? My arguments were directly ignored in this debate when I explained to you on how countries will become over-dependent on foreign aid. And all of this is contingent on what other countries believe in. Let's say, for example, if you are from Uganda and you actually need a proper infrastructure when it comes to healthcare, then what happens here is that if your values in these countries contradict the values of Western liberal democracies, that means because also at the same time countries are willing to actually slush funds from their national budget because they already can see healthcare is covered by other contributors instead. That means you are less likely to actually invest into your own healthcare. What happens here is that when you have foreign aid and then when your values contradict, the foreign aid will practically be cut off and this developmental aid is less likely to go into your country. That means whatever infrastructure that opposition wants would not exist because funding is not there and you have to actually spend more in order to build from ground up. But here's the third part. Will this allow investments into private corporations? Because if you are an American company and you want to hire doctors in Africa, that means now you need to invest in third world countries, like my second argument said, in order for the industry to actually work. Only by then, and then I'm able to hire all of these workers. So that shows there is an incentive by private corporations to invest in these countries so that I can hire these doctors in the future. We allow all of these incentives, and that's why we won this debate.
Thank you very much. You can both shake hands and then you get the results of the whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okspherd A.
Total score. Total score. I never usually calculate this.
So I can just put the total score, right? I don't have to like type
The team score. This is
Yeah, you did Mario too, right? So, what do we have?
Right, so Gav. Okay, unanimous decision.
That's the way I love these kind of movies. Once we have the same wavelength for this one. Do it.
Yeah, you should announce it.
Yeah, almost. Do it. Let's go. Now.